Hey, everybody, it's Fred Diamond. I am, of course, the producer of the Sales Game Changers podcast. Done over 700 Sales Game Changers podcasts. I'm the co founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And my good friend John Knotts is the author of numerous books, but he's specifically the author of the book Crossing the Zone of Fear. So we're going to go through John's book and I am going to do the exercises. John, it's great to see you. You and I have been LinkedIn friends for a long time. We've actually met in person in San Antonio,
Yes.
where you are. I'm based in Northern Virginia. We've had some great conversations over the years. You spent a good part of your life in Michigan. I spent some time in the hills of Farmington. So even though I'm not from Detroit, we have that little, that Midwest type of connection there. But I talk a lot at the Institute for Excellence in Sales that for sales professionals to be successful, they need to be courageous. They need to address fear or eliminate fear. I'm going to get your insights on that. So, we're going to get into this for 7 episodes. We're going to go through your book. I'm going to be your guinea pig. I'm going to be doing the exercises, and you're going to help me get through this. And after 7 episodes, 7 weeks, we're going to publish this podcast every weekend. I want to get past the zone of fear. So, John, introduce yourself. Tell us about the book. Why did you write this book? And by the way, if you're watching, there's the book, Crossing the Zone of Fear. It's well done and it's powerful. And I think we're going to help a lot of people. If we only help myself and you, that's even better. So, tell us about the book. Why'd you write this book?
Well, first off, my name's John Knotts, obviously, and I'm a personal and professional business coach and consultant. I've been doing this stuff for 34 years. I got involved in the Air Force in this and continued. I loved what I was doing when I figured it all out and just kept on moving forward, moving up. And I started writing a book back in COVID 2020. It was July of 2020 on things that I had shared with clients, ways, methodologies, ideas, stuff that I had written in the past about what I call becoming unbelievably successful. And this has turned into one of the books that I published. At the time, I was writing a lot about the concept of fear. See, I've discovered that there are three things that hold us back from success. One of those is complacency. We achieve something big, we get that big sale, that first $10 million sale or something like that. And we're like, I can sit back and I can relax. And what happens is when you're truly trying to become unbelievably successful, you're constantly being successful and having the opportunity of becoming complacent. So when that complacency kicks in, success falters. And it can be hard to restart because it's kind of like a rolling stone. Then the second thing is stress. And we all deal with stress. Everybody deals with stress. And I know there's a lot of people on social media that talk about self-care and mindfulness and you name it, a lot of things out there. But honestly, the big thing that we're really trying to deal with is to lower our stress levels because when we're stressed, we can't think,
Right.
we can't operate, we can't move forward. And stress is in some ways connected to fear. But the third is fear. And there are a lot of fears out there. And I'm not talking about like fear of heights.
Mm.
That's a real fear. I mean, I get it. My wife has fear of heights. I'm talking about fear around success, professional fears that hold us back. So I was writing a lot about this, and I work with this organization here in San Antonio. It's called Executive Book Review.
Mm.
And Mark Wittig, who's the president of the organization, said, "Hey, you're talking a lot about fear. This is a really important topic. I think we should do a book review on fear, maybe a special event." Well, that didn't actually get booked till like 2 years later because of the schedules were already full. But when I started to prepare for this, I went out and I started to research books on fear, and there isn't a whole lot on there. So just decided I'm going to write a book on fear, and I'm going to put everything that I've learned into this book with the focus of identifying what professional fears are, why they occur, and how to overcome them. And it's funny because, pushing the boundary, I posted on social media, I am going to publish this book in 2 months. Not just write it, publish it, have it out there so that it will be available for the book review. And pushing the envelope, I published it in 26 days. Wrote and published it in 26 days. And sometimes when you just put yourself out there, you kind of surprise yourself with what you're capable of doing. But that's kind of like the whole concept of overcoming fear.
Yeah.
And as we go through this, really understanding what this is that we're working on and why it can be so difficult.
I love the way you said that. And it is the concept. People, a lot of times they'll say, I have a fear of failure, but I think a fear of success is even bigger. Again, I've done over 700 sales game changers podcasts, and I've interviewed some amazing leaders from around the world at great companies like Amazon, Salesforce, Hilton, Oracle, etc. And they've all reached a highest level. They can keep going further, a lot of these people, by doing a lot of the things we talk about. And we talk about things like, in sales, there's so many things that people are afraid of asking for the business. One of our good friends, a guy named Steve Richard, worked for a company where they tracked over 5 million sales calls. And I said to him, what's the one thing you learned from tracking over 5 million sales calls? And he said, less than half of the calls had any type of follow up. Right. So here you are, you got someone on the line, which is a victory. And then, kind of like what you said in the beginning, you have this person, you had every phone call, every first call is great. And the goal in sales, especially in the world of enterprise and corporate sales, where we deal with it, the Institute of Excellence in Sales, it's about getting to the next phone call and getting to the next call, or it could be a meeting, or it could be an interaction, whatever it might be. Right. And the great salespeople, they know that it's not one call is going to lead to a $10 million deal. It might take you years, even like a $50,000 deal. It might take you 20, 30 interactions. But John, half of the people scheduled the next thing. So why? Why didn't you do it? And we're teaching you how to do it. The question is, gee, I'd like to speak to you next Tuesday. Or can we arrange a meeting for next Thursday with your CIO and us to go through our whatever it might be? It's pretty easy to ask for the next call, yet half the people didn't ask for it. And we've met so many people who didn't ask for the business, right? Or they went right to the close, right? They, it's like met with a customer after a very short meeting, instead of like asking more challenging questions, which is kind of a core thing in enterprise sales. I've seen people who went right to the close. It's like, hey, Mr. Customer, what's your problem? Customer talks for 5 minutes. Then the sales rep says, I can offer you a 20% discount on our solution. I can get it to you next Thursday. Well, you didn't ask anything to really understand the challenge. There's a fear too, a fear of maybe, being exposed with what you don't know. So I love the way you took the angle of the book. Again, I talk to salespeople all the time who ask me, what is my success? What is my advice for them for being successful? And it's like, you got to be courageous and you got to learn. I mean, sales is a profession. So you got to be a professional, which means understanding the customer journey and the sales process and, who you need to be speaking to and how you need to speak and, presenting yourself and, putting yourself out there. I'm amazed at how many, you and I are very active on LinkedIn. I'm amazed at how many people are not even close to being active on LinkedIn, for example.
Terrified of it.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a lot to unpack in what you said. I got to tell you, there's so many things that I think about. First off, the lack of follow up. Like people are terrified of networking, and I'm
Yeah.
not just talking introverts, into extroverts too. They're just they're scared to go to a networking event, but they go there, they talk to some people, they never follow up.
Yeah.
I go to networking events all the time and nobody ever follows up with me.
Yes.
Nobody. And it's just amazing. So I'm always watching that. When I was really active in the Air Force Sergeants Association while I was in the Air Force, one of the big things we did is recruit new
Mm.
members, getting people in. And we did a lot of recruiting events. And it was always interesting how people they were very happy talking about the organization and what they knew, but asking somebody to sign up.
Mm.
Would you like to sign up? After we've talked all about this, it's like that one little step because they don't want somebody to tell them no.
Yes.
That fear of rejection is
Yes.
kicking them in the face and they don't even realize it. This is the biggest thing that I learned about fear.
Yeah. So
We don't know anything about it.
yeah, so what you wrote the book, you said in 26 days. Uh, on the 27th day, what was the one thing that struck you?
Well, on the 26th day, and every book I've published, this is my sixth book, I'm about to get my seventh out there. It's pushing the button to submit.
Mm,
And I know you're an author, so you
yeah.
probably have felt this too. But when you're ready to release it to the world, and it's one thing to like post on social media about thoughts,
Yeah.
not like a picture of your meal or something. We did this over the weekend, the updates on Twitter or something. I'm talking like you're really sharing your thoughts to the world. But when you put it in a book like this,
Yeah.
you're saying I'm an authority on this.
Yes.
And then you're sitting there thinking, am I really?
Huh.
And where's that coming from? That's called the imposter syndrome,
Yes.
which is a fear. It's fear
Yes.
is manifested in a belief that am I really good enough to do that? And
Yes.
everybody, this is the thing. We all have fears.
Right.
We just don't admit it.
Yeah.
We talk them away. We say it's something else.
Yes.
Oh no, that happened. Or it's just we make it clear in our minds because we
Yes.
always have to lie to ourselves first before we can lie to anybody else that this is the reason why. And that's where fear gets buried.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why nobody writes about it
It's a,
because it's
yeah.
not understood.
It's really interesting. I'm interested in your thoughts. We recently did a Sales Game Changers podcast where the guests use the statement, we all have fears, but you got to do it anyway. Right.
That's
You know,
courage, right?
courage. Exactly. It's interesting. You mentioned that I wrote two books. I wrote two books, published them at the same time, published a book on sales that was based on a lot of the lessons from our Sales Game Changers podcast. And as you know, I published a book on Lyme disease, and it was about relationships with people with chronic Lyme disease, but also chronic illness as well. And I was very, in the sales book, I wasn't particularly vulnerable. There were tips and strategies on being a better partner and how to prospect better based on what people had said. And I really had no fears with that book whatsoever. The Lyme book, I really didn't have a fear because I knew it needed to be published. You talked that there was no book on fear published to that point. There was no book published for family members of people who have what's called chronic Lyme disease. Lyme is a tick-borne illness. And it was literally, I actually wrote an article a year before that. And I had people in the Lyme world who reached out and said, no one's even written an article like this, let alone a book. And I went very deep into some places that even now, as I read the book 2 years later, I'm a little bit surprised where I went. But the other thing too, which you just said, which I liked, is I remember I worked at Apple Computer for a long time, and someone said an expert is someone who drives 50 miles and wears a suit, to an event. They drove 50, they came from 50 miles away and they wore a suit. And, I remember, you and I are published. People are reading this book and they're not saying to themselves, John Knotts, he's he doesn't know anything about fear. He's scared of everything. And no one has reached out to me about either the Lyme or the sales book, and have said, you're full of crap. You don't know what you're talking about. And, either of those things. So the courage for people out there, you and I, let's give ourselves a pat on the back, but anybody who's published, right? Anybody who's posted anything on LinkedIn, anybody who's presented anything to a customer, you're putting yourself out there, and you got to do it. Do you agree? You got to do it more and more, and that's where success eventually leads you to.
Well, I think that that's why the first question in the back of the first 7 pages is, what did you know about fear prior to reading the book?
Mm.
Or what are your thoughts about fear? Because I think a lot of people they don't have a lot of knowledge when it comes to this. What did you
Yes.
think?
Yeah. I agree. All right. So here's what we're going to do on the podcast. We're going to go for a number of pages. John is going to tell me how many pages to read at a time. And then, like he alluded to, he has questions throughout the book. And I have answered those questions. And we're going to go through my answers with the expert on fear, John Knotts. And I'm an expert on sales success. And I truly believe getting past your fear. And we talk about this all the time, making the call, making a price presentation, saying what your price is. A lot of people go with right away, here's my price, but I'm going to give you a 20% discount. Well, I didn't ask you
Right.
for a 20% discount. I mean, you may need to give it, but I see people, even myself, I've done this a couple of times where, oh, my price for membership at the Institute is X, but since you're who you are, I'll give you 20%. Why? Why are you fearful of them saying no to your price? I remember I worked for a large company called CompuWare based out of Detroit, and I worked for them in the late 90s. It was enterprise software. And the guy who was in charge of the entire sales organization said, you should be proud to be selling our product. If you're a sales professional with our company, you should be proud that you're offering this solution to a customer who's challenged with managing their computers, whatever we were solving the problem of. And that always stuck with me. It's like, well, why would you discount? Why would you give away? Now, sometimes, you may need to do some marketing to get in the door and a prototype and, things like that. Maybe not. Maybe there's a fear that you need to get past. There's plenty of people who've sold things at MSRP, manufacturer suggested retail price. you know, a lot of times when we were running the Institute for Excellence in Sales, we would do in-person events. They weren't very expensive. They were $70, $80, whatever. And people would say, well, why don't you give me a free ticket so I can come and see what it's like? And then if I like it, I'll get my company to join. And I remember I would say, I don't think Springsteen gives away free tickets for people to experience him. And then if you like my concert, maybe 5 years from now, when I come through Oklahoma City again, it's like you're going to have to pay full retail price to see me, Bruce Springsteen. And, that kind of thing. I remember it was like, and we went, although sometimes if it was like a strategic customer, like a big company with a lot of salespeople, we might. All right. So, John, get us caught up. Talk about the first 7 pages of the book, Crossing the Zone of Fear. And then we'll go through the questions at the end on page 7. I will answer the questions that you asked, and I'm going to get your thoughts on my answers. We'll talk it through a little bit, and then we'll tee up next week's show on the next chunk of pages. So tell us what you talked about on pages 1 through 6.
One through 6 is it's the forward. So it's really about, why did I write this book? Why did I choose the name Crossing the Zone of Fear? That's what we're really focused on in this little introductory to the book itself. I'll tell you that I had two primary fears. I talk about them in the book. And one was fear of water, fear of
Yeah.
swimming. And I don't know when it was, but I remember reading in a magazine somewhere about people that were swimming in open water, and they got their legs wrapped around seaweed. And when you thrash,
Yeah.
it'll actually tighten up on your legs and pull you down, and they would drown.
Hmm.
And just that concept terrified me. And I wasn't a really, like wasn't big into swimming or anything like that. So it was one of those things that I didn't know what I didn't know. So, like the fear set
Yes.
in, and I was terrified of public speaking.
Yes.
When I was in high school, I would do everything to get out of having to do a formal speech presentation to anything. And I decided I needed to face the fears and did some pretty crazy stuff. Fear of swimming. So what do? I take a water safety course to learn to be a lifeguard. Not that I
Yes.
wanted to be a lifeguard, but and then when I went into the Air Force, and they required I was a cop in the Air Force, and every morning you were tagged on the posting log who was going to give certain safety presentations in front of a 60-person flight. And when my name was up there, man, I was sweating bullets, literally, because I was a cop. And you had to work through it. And finally, I just said, you know what, I need to overcome this. So I went to college and I took two speech classes, one interpersonal and one business,
Yes.
at the same time. So like you writing two books, publishing two books at the same time. I was taking two speech classes at the same time. And addressing these things really changed my life. And we'll talk about what that means when we get into like the second chapter really of the book, but our third call. But really starting to understand my fear and why it was important to write this book. I talked about, well, basically I was writing, becoming unbelievably successful,
Yeah.
and was asked to put together a presentation, no book available, so it was written. And just the concept of crossing the zone of fear, because we've all seen the Venn diagram where you have the zone of comfort, the zone of fear, the zone of learning, the zone of growth.
Yes.
It's very typical. And I really I see things differently in that.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to share that concept in this. So that's what the first parts of the book are all about. That first few pages. I
Yeah.
try not to belabor things
Yeah.
when I write. Like I'm
Yeah.
not going to say it over and over again. You
Yeah.
read it and then let's talk about it. And let's talk about it is, what did you find? What did you know about fear before you cracked that book open?
You know what? I want to address two things that you just said. So you talked about a fear of swimming, being in the
Hmm.
water, and a fear of speaking. Um, I got zero point zero fear of speaking. As a matter of fact, we're doing today's show on August 1st. My father just passed away a week ago, and I gave the eulogy, and it was in front of 80 people. I didn't have any notes, and I thought through what I was going to say. Of course, I just didn't jump up there, but I was speaking in front of 80 people, and I told if I must say so myself, a masterful eulogy. And it actually led to a really good point at the end about my father's life that I didn't even think about until I was towards the end of the eulogy. And swimming as well. I'm not scared of swimming. I could jump in the middle of the ocean and swim and all those kinds of things. And I actually was almost drowned when I was in third grade. I was at camp and we were at the big pool, the Olympic pool. And I remember this kid, Larry, took my head and kept pushing it down in the water. And I was like, what the hell are you doing? I was like screaming. And someone came over and took Larry away from me. And I went right back in the pool. It wasn't like, okay, I need to face my fear. The reason I'm telling you these two stories is, um, people might be listening and saying like, fear of swimming. I mean, less than
Exactly.
less than 0.001 people per year. People like one of the most irrational fears is like being in an airplane crash. But the odds of that happening are like 0.001 type of a thing. But we always hear this thing too, that people are scared to death of speaking. Besides death, people's biggest fear is fear of speaking.
Glossophobia.
Yeah, what's it called?
Glossophobia.
But I love
It's
to
called.
speak. But at the same time, I'm you talked before about fear of heights. I think it's more fear of falling. I've been on the top of the World Trade Center, may it rest in peace, but
Yes.
I'm thinking like, I'm not really afraid of the height. I'm afraid of like falling 50 stories, and it's going to be worse than fearing the fear. All right. So in your preface, so again, I'm going to read your question here. Your question, like you just asked, you asked 4 questions here at the end. What do you already know about fear? And I answered, I know that fear is what prevents abundance. I know it's a natural feeling, but uh, that you must move into it. Wait, but I think that you make more of it than it really is. Right. So it's kind of like, like I just said there before, it's like, if I'm on a tall building, there's a chance that I could die. Well, it's pretty unlikely, or else, a lot of times I'll drive and the road is kind of like weird, or the bridge or the turn. And then I say to myself, people aren't dying here. The United States Road Highway Association, whatever, Department of Highways, Department of Transportation, they wouldn't allow this road to be available if people were going to be flying off it. You know what I'm saying? So talk
Well,
about
that's
my
the
answer
reason
there.
why they have speed limits, right?
Yeah. And they
Well,
have
if you're
like,
going to exceed it,
yeah, I mean, they would close the bridge if there was a chance you were going to die, right? If there was the limited chance. So what are your thoughts on my answer there?
so this is I think the crux of the whole concept of the book is that few people really have thought about fear.
Hmm.
They don't typically, until they pick this thing up, they don't really think about it. And what I want people to do is I want them, what have you thought about it in the past? Up until this point, before you get into this book, what do you what do you know about fear and what do you think about fear?
The fascinating part about that is one of the reasons why, again, you and I we're very vocal on LinkedIn. You help a lot of customers with your coaching, and I have a lot of sales professionals that are involved with the Institute for Excellence in Sales, and we have bigger aspirations. We have big. If you're living like a basic life, just going through the motions, yeah, you may not be thinking about what else is there. One of the reasons why I was so attracted to this book is I want more out of life. I want, and hopefully a lot of people listening to this, or that are exposed to you and I on LinkedIn or wherever we are, they want more out of their careers. They want more out of their relationships. They want more out of their, more wealth, those types of things. They want to go higher, and what occurred to me was, well, I know what those things are. I wrote a book. I'm looking at you behind you. There's probably about 100 books there behind you. Downstairs in my study, I have 100 books, and you and I read and we talk and we do presentations and I talk to successful people every day, and I post 3 podcasts every week, but I'm not worth $1 billion. So, okay, well, why is that guy worth $1 billion? He's just as smart as me, probably, or he probably has, maybe I'll give him more credit, but he has the same amount of hours in the month. He has the same challenges. He still has to, you know, eat a healthy diet. So that's what really attracted me. Now that we're getting through this a little bit, John, it's like everyone listening, we want more out of life. And when you want more out of life, and then you say to yourself, well, what's stopping me? Because there's tons of books. I used to tell people, uh, you know, there's tons of books on how to lose weight, and there's tons of apps, and there's tons of YouTube videos. But if you're not losing weight, well, what is the fear that you have that's preventing you? You could right now go say into ChatGPT, give me a diet for the next 2 weeks to lose 20 pounds. And within 30 seconds, it's going to pop out a diet for you, right? And then you ask a couple more questions to get more specific. Well, okay, everything you need to know is available to you. What's stopping you? The second question you ask are, what are your expectations from reading this book? And I said, my expectations are to figure out all that I fear and act upon them anyway. Does the book going to help me do that?
Oh, absolutely. No, I will say that, I mean, like everything I ever do as a coach is to always understand what is it that you expect out of this relationship first.
Yeah.
How are you going to measure that?
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure at the end of these 7 calls you get exactly that out of this discussion.
Yeah, and
And
vicariously through me, I want people watching this. I work with at the Institute for Excellence in Sales, we have two designations: Premier Sales Employer and Premier Women in Sales Employer. And we also have a personal designation called Premier Sales Leader. I want everybody who's associated with the Institute to become hugely successful in sales. And we're making things available to them to get better. We promise companies we will help you attract, retain, develop, and elevate top tier sales talent. We don't say, hey, we're going to entertain you, once a month. We want you to achieve these amazing goals. Wow, this is great, John. And in the line book, too, I want you to achieve amazing relationships just because someone you love has a ridiculous disease. And the work that you're doing, too. I mean, think about why you wrote this book. I know we talked about it a lot, but, if people are going to get past these fears, think about what you can achieve. Good job,
right.
John. All right, the next question. What major fears do you have today? All right. So, when you and I were talking about this, I was talking about how vulnerable I was willing to be. And I'm not going to go all in because some of these are kind of personal, but I will give a couple of them. One of my fears, and this relates back to what you said before, one of my fears is that past decisions will come back to haunt me. I tell people this: the reason you are in your life right now is because of a decision that you made. If you're happy, if you're sad, if you're fat, if you're thin, if you're successful, if you're single, it all goes back to decisions. Now, I also understand that trauma comes into play, et cetera. We're not going to go deep into trauma. Maybe we will. I haven't gone past page 7 yet, but
We'll talk about it some.
So I talk a lot about, one of my fears is that, there's some decisions I've made that are affecting me. And the second is that my business will not be as successful as it can be. Right. And even like we were talking before, I want my Institute for Excellence in Sales to be let's just throw out a number, X billion, X million. Right. And I want to have X companies involved. Right. And I'm at X and I want to get to Y or X times X, whatever it might be. So what's, the fears I am addressing is, well, what's stopping me from achieving those things?
So I think that just putting those fears down, and I'm sure you have some other fears that are in your head, people that are reading this book and answering those questions, you don't have to get on a on a live podcast and talk about it. But so I appreciate the vulnerability and the authenticity in that. But when we put something down like that, I want to grow my business to this much. First off, I'm as a strategic planning coach, I'm going to say, why only that?
Yeah.
Why not more? Why
Yes.
not the most you could possibly, because we always set these limitations based off our fears. Well,
Yes.
I don't know if I could handle that. I don't know if we could be that big.
Yes.
But that's the reason why we want to ask these questions right up front, is that by putting your fears on paper,
Yeah.
now you can start to address them, because we're going to
Yes.
start to understand why, what are they, and why do they exist,
Yeah.
and how do I deal with them?
And you know what? I'm going to let people know who are listening to this when you get the book. I wrote some additional fears down that I am going to, challenge myself on getting past as I write the book. So we're going to be talking about some that specifically revolve around sales and business. But I want to let people know there are a couple of fears here that I wrote down that are personal that I want to overcome. John, as a friend, you've heard a couple of these before, but I encourage you as you go through the process that I'm going through that you address them, and you got to write them down.
Yep.
Once you get them, I tell people this all the time, physically, I physically wrote these. I didn't, maybe you have an app, I don't know. I didn't type them into the computer. I didn't speak to them. I did speak to them on my phone and they transcribed, but there's a lot of power, brain power, taking the pen and writing it down. All right. The last question that
And
you
this is
asked.
related. This is related to the previous question.
Well, absolutely. All four of them go together. How are these fears holding you back in life? And I wrote number one, it's holding me back from being complete in all the business operations that I need to have in place. I'm holding back in really growing my business to its full extent by not addressing all of the business operations that need to be addressed. For a background, I was an independent solopreneur for a number of years, and certain things I just didn't have to, weren't important to the growth of my business. Now there are things that I've begun to identify that I need to put into play for us to reach those numeric levels I mentioned before. And I also think that the fears are holding me back from being the business leader and the best revenue generator that I can be. It's funny with our business. There's a lot of people who think that we're much larger than we are, and we're successful, and we're very proud of our success and of where we're going and who we work with. But I go back to a story I heard years ago. Uh, a basketball story. Larry Bird at the time was the greatest basketball player in the world, and he was the number one scorer in the National Basketball Association, and he was unsatisfied with how successful he was. He wanted to average 2 more points per game. This is a lot of these athletes, the Michael Jordans of the world, the Bryce Harpers of the world, they're hitting or they're scoring. And we're like, oh my God, you're like the best in the world. And they want to average 2 more points a game, which would make a huge difference. In sales, if you get past what's holding you back and make 3 more good interactions, right, with prospects. And I don't mean just make 5 more phone calls. Who cares about that? But 3 more interactions with someone who can help you grow your business, and something stopping you, whatever it might be, whatever the fear might be, we're going to uncover, your business can grow double, 10 times.
Yeah. We'll take you back to the first fear that you addressed there and its impact on you. So fearing the decisions that I make coming back to haunt me, that will prevent you from making the decisions to grow your business.
Yeah.
So the first step of this is identifying that the fears exist.
Yes.
But really, we're going to get into this, but it's really about naming the fear and
Yes.
really breaking that fear down.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
but this is and this is how it starts.
Yeah.
Now, coming into this book, for people who have just read it, they're only 7 pages in, and they're identifying what they know about fear and how fear is affecting them.
All right. So give us a
So,
little bit of a peek into, again, what we're going to be talking about by next Sunday show.
so what we're going to talk about next is what is fear. So really understanding what it is. And that's over pages 11 to 23. On page 23 is where the questions exist, but it really breaks down what fear is and the different types of fear that are out there.
All right. Once
So
again,
that
for
you can
people,
better
yeah.
identify it.
All right, for people listening again, the book is called Crossing the Zone of Fear. And John, the book's available wherever you get your
On
books.
Amazon. Yep.
Yep, up on Amazon. And again, my name is Fred Diamond. I run the Institute for Excellence in Sales, and I'm the host of the Sales Game Changers podcast. And we're talking to John Knotts. He's the author of, my friend, he's the author of Crossing the Zone of Fear and 5 other books as well. And he's working on his 7th. It's interesting. I published 2 books 2 years ago. Insights for Sales Game Changers, Love Hope Lyme, with family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know. And I'm not working on another book, but maybe there's a fear there that's stopping me from publishing the 2, because people liked, and the sales book, there's a lot of sales books out there, but I've gotten so many great compliments on the Lyme book. I've had thousands of people, who reach out, and I've started a podcast also called the Love Hope Lyme podcast. And I've had people that didn't even know exist who've reached out and thanked me for that. And I've said, what are you going to do next? What's your next book going to be on? And maybe this will help me. And I'll tell people, man, I've only gone through I've read the book, but I've gone through the first 7 pages, taking notes like we're talking about here. And I already have begun, once you state something out to the public, out to the universe, things begin to happen, right? You begin to see with fear, I've begun to see where it's holding me back, and I thought I knew, but then it's like, okay, not addressing that fear is also stopping this from happening.
Yes.
And I can also see
Very
where,
related.
very related. I can also see where people were telling me, what's fearful for them. I'm like, okay, I can understand that. It's not a fear for me, or it is a fear, but I can see where that's coming from. All right, John, I'm excited. We were supposed to go a half an hour. We've gone like 45 minutes, but I
45
appreciate
minutes.
everybody who's listening today. If you're not linked in to John and myself, go connect with us, go buy the book. And I'm excited you lasted this long, and I'm excited for you to go through us on this journey, crossing the zone of fear. All right, thanks, John.
Have a great day.